Soy surrounds the modern supermarket, yet most shoppers rarely see an actual soybean. To understand why, we have to begin with an ancient East Asian crop and follow it into animals, additives, and industrial oil. Pick up an ordinary package of cookies, crackers, salad dressing, or chocolate, and the small print may list soybean oil or soy lecithin. Walk over to the refrigerated aisle, though, and the connection gets harder to spot. Chickens, pigs, dairy cattle, and farmed fish may have eaten feed made with soybean meal, but the meat, milk, eggs, and fish they produce do not carry soy on the ingredient label. That gives us our first correction. Soy is not literally present in every product, and you cannot measure its dominance by counting blocks of tofu or bottles of soy sauce. Much of it reaches consumers indirectly, after the bean has been crushed, separated, refined, fed to animals, or remade into ingredients that no longer resemble a bean. So how did a visible East Asian crop become infrastructure for the global food system? The answer begins with a plant whose most useful natural habit was also a recurring frustration for farmers. Botanists know the cultivated soybean as glycine max. Its closest wild relative, glycine soja, still grows across parts of East Asia. The plants are clearly related, but the wild form behaves like something built to survive without human help, which of course it is. When wild soybean pods mature and dry, their walls twist apart. The pod splits open and throws its seeds onto the ground. Botanists call this seed shattering. For the plant, it is an effective way to spread the next generation before animals, mold, or bad weather can destroy every seed in one place. For a farmer trying to collect the crop, it is a dreadful scheduling system. Wait too long, and the harvest throws itself into the dirt. The domestication of soybean was not one invention, made by one person in one year. Archaeological remains, changes in seed size, and modern genetic research point to a long process centered in ancient China, although scholars still debate the exact timing, the geography, and whether cultivation developed through more than one regional population. Generation after generation, people saved seed from plants that better suited their needs. Some plants produced larger beans, some matured at a useful time. Others kept their pods closed long enough to be gathered. Those small preferences accumulated into biological change, larger seeds, more dependable harvests, plants increasingly shaped by the people who grew them. This first transformation looks modest beside a modern crushing plant, but the underlying principle is already there. People were redesigning soy for collection, storage, and repeated use. A pod that efficiently threw away its own inventory had to be persuaded to wait. Soy had another useful relationship below the soil. Nodules form on its roots when the plant partners with certain bacteria called rhizobia. Inside those nodules, the bacteria convert nitrogen from the atmosphere into chemical forms the plant can use. The plant, in return, supplies energy produced through photosynthesis. This does not mean soy creates unlimited fertility from nothing. The partnership needs compatible microbes and suitable soil conditions, and harvested beans remove nutrients from the field. Other nutrients still have to come from the soil or from agricultural inputs. Even so, nitrogen fixation helped make soybean valuable in farming systems, especially when farmers rotated it with crops that could not form the same partnership. Above ground, the bean was becoming easier to harvest. Below ground, it was becoming useful to agriculture. But neither trait explains soy's cultural importance on its own. That depended on what people did after they harvested it. A mature soybean is rich in protein and oil, but a raw bean is not especially cooperative as food. It is hard, its flavor can be challenging, and it contains compounds that interfere with digestive enzymes or limit access to some nutrients. Proper heating disables important inhibitors. Soaking, grinding, cooking, pressing, culturing, and fermentation each alter the bean differently, changing its texture, flavor, storage life, and digestibility. Across China, communities found distinct answers to one material question: what can this seed become? Cooked beans could be eaten directly. Ground beans mixed with water could produce a liquid from which curds were formed. Fermentation created pastes and sauces with deep savory flavors, as molds, yeasts, and bacteria transformed proteins and carbohydrates over time. Pressing separated curds from liquid. Salting preserved products long after fresh beans would have spoiled. These were far more than decorative variations on an unchanged ingredient. They were technologies. Each process gave soy a new physical identity and a different role in a meal. Written traditions sometimes place soybean among the culturally important grain crops of ancient China, although famous lists of the so-called 5 grains vary by text and period. That variation matters. There was no single agricultural canon extending unchanged across thousands of years. Soy's status varied by region, era, and use, just as the foods made from it did. Tofu comes with an especially tidy legend. A widely repeated story credits its invention to Liu An, a prince of the Han dynasty who lived in the 2nd century before the Common Era. It has everything a good origin story wants: one famous person, one ancient court, one recognizable food. But surviving contemporary evidence does not securely establish that he invented it. The story grew much more definite than the documentation. What we can say with greater confidence is that curdled soybean foods emerged from a broader world of grinding, heating, coagulation, and food preservation. Their development was probably cumulative. Techniques moved from place to place. Households adapted them. Craftspeople refined them. A clean royal origin story is easier to remember, but food technology rarely waits for one inventor to sign the recipe. Buddhist institutions and meatless dietary traditions later helped certain soy foods become important in parts of East Asia. Tofu and other bean products fit cuisines in which meat was limited or avoided. But religion did not create soy processing by itself. Farmers, household cooks, merchants, monasteries, urban workshops, and regional tastes all took part in its development. Nor did soy become one uniform East Asian food culture. As the crop and its processing knowledge moved through Korea, Japan, and other parts of the region, local conditions created distinct traditions. Climate affected fermentation. Available microbes affected flavor. Salt, vessels, seasons, grains, and preservation needs all influenced the finished food. Fermented soybean pastes in Korea developed histories of their own. Japanese miso, shoyu, natto, and tofu acquired regional forms, production methods, and social meanings that cannot be dismissed as copies of Chinese originals. Foods travel, but they never arrive culturally empty. Communities adopt them, alter them, and make them local. That adaptability gave soy its first broad geographic reach. Migrants carried seeds and habits. Monks and merchants moved prepared foods and production methods. Agricultural knowledge crossed borders. Throughout this expansion, the bean remained visible in curds, sauces, pastes, cooked dishes, and storage jars. Even when processing, it radically changed its form. European observers encountered fragments of this world long before soy became a major Western crop. In the late 17th century, the German physician and naturalist Engelbert Kempfer spent time in Japan. His published descriptions in the early 18th century introduced European readers to Japanese plants and foods, including products made from soybeans. A botanical description could cross an ocean more easily than an agricultural system. Readers might learn that a sauce existed or that a bean could become curd, but a paragraph could not provide the right seed variety, climate, microbial culture, processing equipment, market, or culinary expectations. You can see the translation problem clearly in the 18th century.
when Benjamin Franklin wrote about a Chinese food made from beans and compared it to cheese. Franklin was using a familiar category to explain an unfamiliar product. Bean cheese was not exact, but it offered a bridge to readers who had never seen tofu.
Apparently, even the Enlightenment sometimes needed the phrase, "It is a little like cheese." Franklin also took part in exchanges involving soybean seeds and information. But those episodes do not settle who brought the first soybean to North America. First might mean the first seed sent, the first plant grown experimentally, the first documented crop, the first use as food, or the first commercially important field. Each is a different milestone. Samuel Bowen gives us one of the earliest well-documented colonial examples. After spending time in China, Bowen settled in Georgia in the 18th century and cultivated soybeans there. He processed them into products including sauce and promoted their agricultural and commercial possibilities. Colonial records make his work significant, but his experiments did not immediately produce a lasting American soybean economy. Soy remained marginal in the United States for generations. It appeared in botanical collections, garden experiments, forage trials, and scattered agricultural projects. Western observers understood that the bean was versatile. What they did not have was a system that rewarded farmers for planting it on a large scale. That system started taking shape in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. American agriculture was becoming more scientific and institutional. Experiment stations compared crop varieties. Federal specialists collected plants from abroad. Researchers no longer asked only whether soybean could grow. They wanted to know which soybean would mature in a particular region, produce useful forage, resist lodging, yield enough beans, and contain oil worth extracting. Two important figures in this work were Charles Vancouver Piper and William Joseph Morse of the United States Department of Agriculture. Through publications and trials, they organized knowledge that had previously been scattered among local experiments. They evaluated soybeans as forage, hay, green manure, food, and seed crops. They also expanded the range of varieties available to American farmers. Morse devoted much of his career to researching and promoting soybean. He studied varieties, worked through the Department of Agriculture's plant introduction system, and collected soybean material in East Asia. That wider seed base mattered because soybean is highly sensitive to day length. A variety that succeeds at one latitude may flower too early or mature too late at another. There was no single perfect soybean waiting to cover the continent. Trial plots provided the unglamorous answer. Plant many varieties, record when they flower, measure the yield, watch whether the stems remain upright, test the oil and protein, then repeat the work somewhere else. Agricultural history tends to remember spectacular machines more easily than rows of labeled plants. Here, the rows mattered more. They helped researchers match soybean genetics to American regions and uses. Better seed, however, could not create a major commodity on its own. Farmers needed buyers. A field harvested for beans had to compete with crops that already had markets, storage networks, and processing industries. Soy became economically persuasive only when companies could turn a single harvest into several products they could sell. Commercial crushing supplied that missing piece. In the early 20th century, companies started processing American soybeans on an industrial scale. The A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company in Decatur, Illinois, became an important early buyer and crusher during the 1920s. Agricultural experimentation had finally met factory demand. Suitable beans could reach processors. Processors could promise farmers a market. Each made the other more practical. Now follow one soybean into the plant. First, the beans are cleaned to remove dirt and unwanted material. Their hulls can be loosened and separated. The beans are cracked, conditioned with heat and moisture, and rolled into thin flakes. This increases the surface area from which oil can be removed. Modern plants commonly use solvents in a controlled extraction process, although the equipment and methods have changed across time and place. The extracted oil is separated and refined. It may become bottled cooking oil, an ingredient in prepared food, or a starting material for products such as shortening and margarine. Further processing changes its color, flavor, stability, or physical behavior according to its intended use. What remains after the oil comes out is not waste. Soybean meal retains a high concentration of protein. Processors heat it, partly to deactivate compounds that interfere with digestion, and then prepare it for animal feed. The hulls can also enter feed and other markets. A single bean has become two major commodities, oil and meal. The arrangement works because neither product has to carry the crop's entire value. The oil moves into kitchens and factories, the meal moves into feed bins, and the soybean itself starts disappearing. War sped up this transition. During the Second World War, disruptions to imported fats and oils increased the strategic value of oilseed crops in the United States. Farmers planted more soybeans, processors expanded, and government attention strengthened the crop's position. Wartime demand did not cause soy's rise by itself, but it helped turn an emerging industry into a much larger one. The deeper transformation came in the post-war food system. Poultry and pork production expanded and became more specialized. Breeding, veterinary medicine, controlled housing, formulated rations, processing, refrigeration, and distribution allowed producers to raise more animals through tightly coordinated systems. All those animals needed dependable feed. Corn supplied abundant energy, but a corn-heavy ration needed complementary sources of protein and essential amino acids. Properly processed soybean meal filled that role extremely well. It was concentrated, tradable, increasingly standardized, and available from the same crushing system that produced vegetable oil. Demand for meat now created demand for soy, even when consumers never ordered soy. Someone could avoid tofu completely and still participate in the soybean economy through chicken, pork, eggs, dairy products, or farmed fish. This is the mechanism behind soy's hidden reach. The crop did not need to conquer every cuisine as a visible bean. It only had to become useful to the systems producing other foods. Soybean oil opened another route into the supermarket. Refined soybean oil could be used in frying, baking, dressings, sauces, margarines, and packaged foods. Depending on processing and national labeling rules, the package might say soybean oil, vegetable oil, or something more specific. Then there were the smaller ingredients. Lecithin, much of it produced during soybean oil processing, is an emulsifier. Oil and water naturally separate because their molecules interact differently. Lecithin contains molecular structures that can associate with both, helping the mixture remain stable. That makes it useful in products such as chocolate, baked goods, dressings, and powdered mixes. Soy can also be made into flour, protein concentrate, protein isolate, and textured protein. These ingredients may add protein, alter texture, bind water, or make manufacturing more consistent. By the time they enter the finished product, none of them has to look anything like a yellow bean. Henry Ford famously promoted experimental uses for soybeans and posed with a car body made partly from agricultural materials. The exact composition of the much-discussed soybean car has inspired claims more confident than the surviving documentation allows. It became an enduring publicity story. At the same time, soybean meal was quietly transforming livestock agriculture, a less theatrical development and a vastly more important one. The industrial logic fed itself. More crushing capacity produced more meal and oil. Growing animal production created a dependable market for the meal. Expanding food manufacturing created markets for the oil and specialized ingredients. Those markets made soybean planting more attractive, supporting even larger processing and trading networks. Soy had become a platform crop before anyone called it one. The next expansion carried that platform across continents. By the late 20th century, most of the world's soy harvest was being crushed, and animal feed had become its dominant indirect destination. Exact shares vary by year, dataset, and method of classification, but the broad pattern is clear. Direct foods such as tofu, tempeh, edamame, and soy beverages account for a much smaller portion of total soybean use than the feed and oil system. That distinction changes the appearance of a soybean market. Its customers are not limited to people choosing ingredients. They include crushers, feed manufacturers, poultry companies, hog producers, aquaculture operations, cooking oil refiners, food factories, and international commodity traders. Biotechnology made soybean easier to fit into certain large-scale farming systems. In the 1990s, genetically engineered soybeans designed to tolerate glyphosate-based herbicide were approved and commercially introduced in the United States. The trait allowed soybean plants to survive applications that killed many competing weeds. We need to be exact about what that trait did not do. It did not automatically increase the yield of every soybean. It did not make the crop immune to insects, drought, or poor soil. Its immediate function was to provide more flexibility in weed management. For many farmers, that flexibility simplified field operations and suited large acreages and reduced tillage systems. Adoption moved quickly in countries where the technology received approval and matched existing agricultural conditions. But it also created new pressures. Repeated use of the same herbicide selected for weeds capable of surviving it. Resistant populations spread and weed control programs became complicated once again. Effects on herbicide quantities, toxicity, yields, costs, and farm structure differ by place and period. One universal statistic cannot describe them honestly. The narrower conclusion holds. Herbicide-tolerant soybean became deeply integrated into industrial production because it changed how farmers could manage weeds across large fields. Meanwhile, researchers were overcoming a different barrier in South America. Soybean evolved and was domesticated in temperate and seasonally variable parts of East Asia. Moving it into lower latitudes required more than carrying seed south. Soybeans respond to day length, and poorly matched varieties may flower before the plant has grown enough to produce a strong crop. Brazilian researchers and breeders developed varieties suited to tropical and subtropical conditions. Agricultural scientists also worked on the difficult soils of the Cerrado, the vast tropical savanna covering much of central Brazil. Many of those soils are naturally acidic and contain low levels of nutrients available to crops. Liming can reduce the acidity. Fertilizer replaces limiting nutrients. Inoculation supplies compatible nitrogen-fixing bacteria where the necessary strains are absent or unreliable. None of this made the land naturally effortless. But together, these measures made commercial soybean production possible in areas once considered poorly suited to the crop. Roads, storage facilities, ports, credit, machinery, land policy, and international demand then determined how quickly that technical possibility became an agricultural frontier. Brazil grew into a soybean power because plant breeding, soil management, infrastructure, capital, and export markets converged, not because someone found one miraculous seed. Argentina became another major center. Genetically engineered soybean, no-till planting, processing capacity, and export demand supported rapid expansion there, although the results included contested changes in land use, rural economies, weed management, and chemical dependence. The details varied across national borders. The larger system remained the same. Feed demand connected it all. As livestock production grew in Europe and Asia, imported soybean meal, or soybeans, allowed regions with limited land to sustain much more animal production than local feed crops could support by themselves. China's growth as an import market became especially important. A soybean planted in the Americas might be crushed near its origin or shipped across an ocean, then enter poultry, pork, dairy, or aquaculture supply chains thousands of miles away. Soy had conquered distance without becoming more visible. In fact, the opposite happened. The longer the chain grew, the more easily soy disappeared inside something else. And that success placed new pressure on land. Soy's connection to deforestation is real, but the simplest version of the story leaves too much out. The Amazon rainforest and the Cerrado are different biomes with different histories, protections, vegetation, and patterns of conversion. Satellite images and land use records can often identify direct clearing for soybean. Indirect effects are harder to separate. In parts of the Amazon, cattle pasture has often occupied newly cleared land before soybean arrives. Soy growers may later buy or lease pasture that has already been cleared. On a narrow map of direct conversion, the soybean field replaced grass, not forest. But rising land values and demand can still affect the wider frontier, potentially pushing cattle production or other activities somewhere else. That does not make every soybean field the indirect cause of another clearing. Land markets respond simultaneously to roads, speculation, enforcement, credit, cattle prices, crop prices, and public policy. Researchers usually estimate displacement through models and linked land records. They do not observe it as one simple transaction. Evidence is strongest for direct conversion and becomes less certain when tracing pressure across several properties and several years. In 2006, companies and civil society organizations established what became known as the Amazon Soy Moratorium. Major traders agreed not to purchase soy grown on Amazon land deforested after the specified cutoff. Satellite monitoring and supply chain controls followed. Research has found that the agreement sharply reduced direct conversion of Amazon forest to soy on monitored properties. It became one of the best-known examples of a commodity agreement changing land use behavior. But success within its boundaries did not end deforestation, settle indirect displacement, or protect every ecosystem affected by soybean expansion. The Cerrado became the critical counterexample. Its wooded grasslands, shrublands, and forests hold exceptional biodiversity and store substantial carbon. But in public imagery, they can look less dramatic than dense rainforest. Large areas have been converted to pasture and crops, including soy. Protections and supply chain commitments have not always matched those used in the Amazon. A policy can close one measurable route of destruction and leave another open. That is progress. It is not completion. Soy also creates an efficiency paradox. The same harvest produces valuable oil and concentrated protein. Its yields and feed quality make it highly efficient compared with many potential substitutes. Replacing every ton of soy with a less productive crop could require more land rather than less. But efficiency places no ceiling on demand. If growing livestock systems keep absorbing more meal, even an efficient crop can spread over immense areas. A machine may use land effectively and still consume a great deal of it once the machine becomes enormous. The environmental problem, then, is not some uniquely destructive quality inside the soybean. The problem is that a highly adaptable, highly processable crop sits inside a global system with powerful incentives to expand it. Crushers want meal and oil. Livestock producers want concentrated protein. Food manufacturers want stable ingredients. Exporters want a commodity that travels. Farmers respond to those markets wherever land, infrastructure, and policy make production possible. Each use strengthens the rest. This is also why soy's history cannot be reduced to a virtuous traditional food corrupted by the modern bean. Tofu, soy sauce, fermented pastes, and other East Asian foods were not an unfinished prelude to industrial agriculture. They have sophisticated culinary histories that remain alive in their own right. Industrial soy developed a second identity alongside them. One identity is visible, culturally specific, and shaped by centuries of cooking and fermentation. The other is standardized, divisible, and built to move through factories, feed systems, and global markets. Both come from the same species. They ask the bean to do very different work. The whole transformation unfolded through a series of practical changes. Wild pods scattered their seeds. Ancient farmers selected plants that held onto them. Communities soaked, heated, ground, pressed, and fermented the harvest. They created foods that could move through culture even when the raw bean could not. Seeds and descriptions traveled into Korea, Japan, Europe, and North America. Observers translated unfamiliar soy foods into categories they understood. Farmers tested whether the crop would mature. Researchers compared varieties. Processors built a market. Crushing separated oil from protein-rich meal. Livestock production turned that meal into soy's largest hidden pathway. Food manufacturers refined the oil and divided soy into increasingly specialized ingredients. Biotechnology simplified particular farming operations. Tropical breeding and soil management opened new production regions. International trade connected distant fields with animals and consumers on another continent. Farmers preserved it. Food makers transformed it. Scientists adapted it. Industry separated it. Animals consumed it. Global trade made it hard to see. The result is not a bean scattered uniformly across every shelf. It is more consequential than that. One crop connected to many shelves through several routes at once. Go back to the package from the beginning. Perhaps its label lists soybean oil. Perhaps soy lecithin appears near the end in small type, quietly keeping the ingredients mixed. In that product, the connection is direct and legally visible. Then look at the chicken, eggs, pork, milk, or farmed fish beside it. Soy may have helped produce those foods through animal feed, but it is not an ingredient in the same sense, and the label usually has no reason to describe the animal's ration. That connection is agricultural and economic, not a hidden additive. This distinction is the key to the title. Soy is not literally inside almost everything. Its reach remains hidden because the modern food system records finished products more readily than the chains behind them. The physical reversal is hard to miss. Ancient farmers favored soybean plants that held onto their seeds long enough to be seen and gathered. Modern industry split those same seeds into so many separate pathways that the soybean nearly vanished from view. The oil may appear in a dressing. Lecithin may stabilize chocolate. Protein can alter the texture of a manufactured food. Meal can feed an animal whose final product carries no soy label. The remaining commodity can cross an ocean and begin the process again. There is no need for a secret ingredient. No labeling conspiracy. Only a crop that became useful to several industrial systems at once. That is how an East Asian bean acquired two overlapping lives. One as a visible family of foods with deep regional histories, the other as a standardized raw material moving through animals, machines, packages, and continents. Soy conquered the supermarket less by persuading everyone to eat soybeans than by becoming indispensable to foods that seemed to have nothing to do with them. If this history changed how you see an ordinary ingredient label, subscribe to The Hidden Course and share the part of soy's transformation that surprised you most.